I recorded this video on the Stairmaster earlier, but my microphone wasn't connected, so we're going to be redoing it. I am going to be discussing a topic that every single in-person personal trainer likely skips, and most nutrition coaches also skip as well. So let's get right into it. The thing that almost nobody explains correctly is that men and women do not follow the same nutrition rules with different calorie targets. Their hormonal architecture is fundamentally different in a way that changes the entire way that what we call optimal eating looks like in each gender. A man's hormonal environment is comparatively flat. Testosterone, insulin sensitivity, and cortisol reactivity, these stay in a fairly narrow range from Monday to Sunday. He can run a relatively fixed nutrition strategy because his biology will stay relatively fixed throughout the week. On the other hand, a woman's body is running a roughly 4-week hormonal cycle. Two dominant hormones, estrogen and progesterone, rise and fall dramatically across the month. And because these two hormones directly regulate insulin sensitivity, metabolic rate, protein turnover, and stress reactivity, a fixed one-size-fits-all diet is biologically mismatched to how her body actually operates across those 4 weeks. This is the biological reason why women need to be more precise when it comes to a diet with long-term goals. When energy intake does not match what a specific phase demands, the downstream effects hit a system that men don't even have to worry about. The hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. Undereat too aggressively and the body will sacrifice reproductive function to conserve energy. It's not a theory, it's a well-documented protective mechanism called functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, and it starts with something as simple as chronic underfueling relative to cycle demands. Let's break it down to the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle so you can understand the nutritional necessities of each phase a little bit better. We're going to first discuss the menstrual phase, days 1 through 5. What is happening hormonally? So estrogen and progesterone are both at their lowest point of the entire cycle. The uterine lining is shredding, which means the body is losing iron through blood loss. Inflammatory markers tend to rise slightly during this window. The foods you should eat and the reasoning behind it. Grass-fed beef and liver are ideal. Heme iron from animal sources is going to be absorbed far more efficiently than plant-based iron. If you pair it with vitamin C-rich foods like citrus or bell peppers, you will further increase your absorption. Because inflammation is elevated, omega-3 rich foods like salmon and sardines help blunt prostaglandin-driven cramping. Magnesium-rich foods like dark leafy greens or pumpkin seeds can also help relax uterine smooth muscle and reduce cramp severity. This nutrition pattern will follow into the follicular phase, so essentially days 1 through 13. Estrogen will begin climbing in the follicular phase steadily as the ovarian follicles develop. This rising estrogen actually improves insulin sensitivity. The body is going to handle carbohydrates more efficiently during this window than at any other point in the cycle. Energy, mood, and exercise capacity tend to trend upwards as this phase progresses. So now the foods you should eat during this phase and why. Insulin sensitivity is at its best now, so this is the phase to be less conservative with carbohydrates. Along with the foods mentioned for menstrual phase, Japanese sweet potato, quinoa, and fruit are well utilized without the same insulin cost they'd carry later in the cycle. Rising estrogen also increases demand for B vitamins to support estrogen metabolism in the liver. Eggs, leafy greens, and like I said earlier, grass-fed beef will cover that. This is a good window for higher intensity training paired with adequate carbohydrate intake, since the body is primed to use glucose way more efficiently when this insulin sensitivity window is active. During phase 3, the ovulatory phase, hormonally, estrogen is going to peak right before ovulation begins, and then luteinizing hormone will surge sharply to trigger the release of the egg. Testosterone will also get a small brief bump in women during this window, which is part of why energy and libido often peak here. Nutritionally, the things that will be necessary in this instance will be zinc, especially here because it will directly support the luteinizing hormone surge and ovulatory function. It is often overlooked in women's nutrition entirely. Oysters, pumpkin seeds, and grass-fed beef apply just as much to women in this phase as they do to men generally. Antioxidant-rich foods such as cruciferous vegetables or berries will support egg quality by protecting against oxidative stress during ovulation. This is typically the highest energy phase of the month, so it's a good window to train hardest and eat to support performance. The luteal phase, days 15 to 28, will explain pretty much everything about why women's nutrition needs to be more deliberate. Progesterone will rise and become dominant. Progesterone is catabolic, meaning it increases protein breakdown and whole body protein turnover. This is a major reason that resting metabolic rate is going to be measurably higher during this phase across multiple controlled studies. At the same time, insulin sensitivity declines. The same amount of carbohydrates that was well tolerated in the follicular phase will now produce a larger insulin response. Cortisol reactivity to stress will also increase in this phase, meaning that the body responds to the same stressor with a bigger cortisol spike than it would have earlier in the cycle. And because energy expenditure protein turnover, and stress reactivity are all elevated simultaneously, this is the phase where underfueling will do the most damage. It is the window most associated with the leptin drop and GnRH suppression that can eventually disrupt the entire cycle if you underfuel yourself repeatedly. Protein intake needs to go up during this phase. The increased protein catabolism from progesterone means the body is actually breaking down more tissue, and dietary protein needs to match that to prevent muscle loss. Grass-fed meat, eggs, fermented dairy, poultry are the anchors here. Because insulin sensitivity is lower, carbohydrate choices are going to shift towards slower digesting fiber-rich sources, root vegetables, legumes, whole fruit, rather than the more liberal approach that was used in the follicular phase. This isn't about eating fewer carbs out of fear, it's about matching the carbohydrate type to what the body can actually process efficiently right now. Because cortisol reactivity is elevated, magnesium and omega-3s will become even more important for blunting the stress response. That is also not coincidentally when cravings and irritability tend to spike, and undereating on top of that spike is usually what will push people into a binge and then restrict cycle. Total caloric intake should trend slightly higher than the follicular phase to match the measurable rise in resting metabolic rate. This is one of the most overlooked details in women's nutrition. Most tracking apps and most coaches will use one static calorie target for the entire month. Biologically, this is incorrect. Now we'll cover men, and you'll immediately notice why this section looks different. There's no phase-by-phase breakdown because there doesn't need to be. Male hormonal health comes down to 5 systems: testosterone production, thyroid function, insulin sensitivity, cortisol regulation, and growth hormone release. All 5 of these are going to depend on specific micronutrients that the body cannot manufacture on its own. Zinc's the most important trace mineral for testosterone synthesis. It's also a direct cofactor in the enzyme that converts cholesterol into testosterone inside the Leydig cells of the testes. Oysters are the richest source on the planet, as we mentioned earlier. Grass-fed beef, pumpkin seeds, and lamb are excellent backups. Magnesium works alongside zinc in reducing sex hormone-binding globulin, meaning more testosterone will stay free and biologically active instead of bound up and unusable. Dark leafy greens and pumpkin seeds, also dark chocolate, are top sources. Vitamin D functions almost like a steroid hormone itself, with receptors directly on cells that produce testosterone. Wild-caught fatty fish like salmon and sardines, egg yolks, and direct sunlight are the primary sources. Most men are chronically deficient simply from lack of sun exposure. Selenium protects the testes from oxidative stress during hormone production, and it supports thyroid conversion. Brazil nuts are insanely concentrated. 1 or 2 a day will cover your entire need. Grass-fed liver is also another dense source. Choline and B vitamins, especially B6 and B12, will support the liver's ability to clear used estrogen out of the body, critical for maintaining a healthy testosterone to estrogen ratio. Egg yolks are the best source of choline on earth. Grass-fed liver will cover B12. Vitamin K2, which is found in grass-fed dairy and fermented foods, will work with vitamin D to direct calcium into bone rather than soft tissue and support overall endocrine signaling. Omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish, pasture-raised eggs, and grass-fed meat reduce systemic inflammation, one of the biggest silent suppressors of testosterone production. The pattern is simple: nose-to-tail animal protein, pasture-raised eggs, fatty fish, nuts and seeds, and sunlight. That's the foundation, and because a man's hormonal environment doesn't shift dramatically day to day, this same approach holds steady all month, every month, for the entire year. The actual takeaway is that men can run a relatively fixed nutrition strategy because their hormonal environment stays the same. Women cannot because estrogen and progesterone are pulling insulin sensitivity, metabolic rate, and stress reactivity in different directions across a 4-week cycle, and ignoring that is not going to be good for you. It's going to actively increase the risk of energy availability dropping low enough to disrupt the reproductive axis itself. This is why the individualized mechanism-based training that I offer, based on your own hormones, based on how your body biologically works, which is what I study. I'm a bio minor. I'm a cardiovascular sonography major. I go to school to help humans be healthy. This is why there's more value to my approach of coaching than the first person you're going to find when you go look for an online coach and get the first link you click on, or go to a gym and get put with the first trainer that has a scheduled availability. You're not going to find that kind of individuality and care, to put it frankly, within that coach. That's why you should click the link in the bio, DM me, reach out. We're going to get started. We're going to get you right.